Are Costa Rica and Brazil in the fast lane when it comes to e-mobility? Brazil is Latin America's largest electric vehicle market. Now, after years in the fast lane, Brazilian cities are looking to hop aboard too by electrifying their city bus fleets. Meanwhile, sets of laws from the last decade are hoping to show that removing economic barriers in Costa Rica could be the power that this small country needs when it comes to revving up its battery electric engines. Costa Rica is a small country in Latin America. We'll talk more about how that country increased electric vehicle uptake in a moment. But first, I want to show you one of the rarest cars in Costa Rica. A converted electric car. It used to be a petrol vehicle before being converted by these two startup founders, Cesar Gonzalez Solis and Emmanuel Castro. Besides showing that a conversion like this is possible, the co-founders' other goal is making the case that conversions of existing fleets for companies or utilities makes economic sense. They say converting can be cheaper than buying a new EV.
Reduced prices puts us in a sector of the market where there are people who may not be able to buy a new vehicle, but they can opt for a converted electric vehicle.
As car enthusiasts themselves, the goal was to allow people the freedom to renew the vehicles they already have. But the pair say it's difficult to do these conversions and takes time.
A conversion can take about 3 or 4 months depending on the vehicle, how complex it is, all that weight distribution and design that we have to do. So it's a whole study.
Sourcing parts to fit the custom builds is also an issue, but the co-founders hope that by showing off the handful of cars that they've already converted over the last year and a half, including the yellow Mini Cooper we saw earlier, that they can convince companies and cities to convert their existing fleets instead of buying new.
It's a fraction of the price. If you compare cars like the Mini Cooper, it costs around $13,000. Now, a Mini that comes straight out of the factory, right now, that costs between $50,000 and $60,000 here.
Converting existing petrol cars into fully electric ones is just one innovation. But back to those laws we told you about earlier. The way the law works is there are 4 different price brackets that each have different discounts. A car like this one gets 100% of its general sales, excise, and customs value tax waived. That's because the Geely Geometry C starts at $27,900 USD. But 0% of those taxes get waived for values above $60,000, like for this car, the Lexus RZ 450e, which falls into that most expensive bracket. The values between those two categories receive staggered reductions. This is part of the Costa Rican government's attempts to remove financial barriers to make buying new electric vehicles more appealing.
We know other countries have restrictions or more taxes on combustion vehicles and punish that decision to purchase one. Not in Costa Rica.
This is Silvia Rojas. She's the president of the Latin American Association for Sustainable Mobility. Other perks include free parking in some areas and waiving annual road permit fees. But how well has it worked? Reportedly, Costa Rica's market share of electric vehicles is high. We had trouble confirming official figures, but one trade magazine, Alitech, says the electric vehicle market share there is high. In 2022, between 7.3% and 7.5%. Compare that to official figures from Canada, the US, Colombia, and Brazil for the same year. When the law passed in 2018, revenues in Costa Rica from the electric vehicle market were nearly 14 million USD. But the market's rising, and Statista Market Insights estimates it will be worth 321 million by 2028. Small compared to some of its neighbors, true, but not bad for a country like Costa Rica. But as the case here shows, there are plenty of people who can't afford or don't want to buy their own EVs. So how do we electrify their transport? Enter the humble bus. Just a few kilometers outside of Sao Paulo is a production site for the company Electra. This Brazilian company has been making electric trolley buses for decades, but in recent years they added 100% electric battery buses to their catalog. These buses are already on the streets of the neighboring megacity Sao Paulo.
We have 85% of the pure electric market.
That's Aida Oliveira, the executive director of Electra. She couldn't join us on site, so we hopped on a call. She knows the buses her company produces are more expensive, so that initial investment has to be worth it for city officials in the long run.
If we put buses that cost 3 times more than diesel buses and they last less than 15 years, we will undermine the transport system not only in Brazil, but in Latin America. These buses must last at least 15 years in the system.
Making sure buses last is critical here in Sao Paulo, where the city banned the purchase of new petrol-powered buses in 2022.
In Sao Paulo, the public transport system is composed of 12,000 vehicles that run daily all over the city. They transport an average of 7 million passengers.
Paris, for comparison, has just over 2 million residents and 4,700 public buses, and earned the title of Best City in Europe for public transport last year. But in Sao Paulo, which is 15 times the size of the French City of Lights, and with nearly 6 times as many people, buses are a major part of the transportation network. It's going to be a heavy lift to meet the ambitious goal of increasing its EV fleet to 20%. Reducing noise and pollution are additional benefits, but hitting national targets to reduce CO2 in line with the Paris Climate Accord is a factor. And Brazil, like many Latin American nations, has a relatively green electricity grid.
In Latin America, 65% of electricity comes from green and renewable sources.
Andres Reboedo is the executive secretary of the Latin American Energy Organization.
There are countries where renewables account for nearly 100% of electricity. Paraguay, Uruguay, and at some hours of the day, Chile.
Many of the countries in this region have large hydro projects and other green energy sources, all contributing to a cleaner energy matrix, making the switch to electric vehicles more impactful. But this is not a simple swap over. For one, electric buses are more expensive.
It has a high initial investment cost, and that's precisely because of the new technology.
Before the pandemic, Miranda estimates the initial investment was twice as much as a petrol bus. Now,
we have observed that the battery electric vehicle was costing 3 times more than a traditional diesel vehicle.
he adds that new technology has also meant adoption bottlenecks, as infrastructure like electric charging garages have to be installed.
There has to be all the necessary logistics, because today the logistics of diesel is much more consolidated. That's because the garages are where a great volume of fuel is consumed by each of the buses. Today the garage itself, the concessionaire company itself, they have their own path and tanks. The large distributors buy and fill them.
Cost and infrastructure. These are also problems faced by customers when buying personal vehicles around the world. Beyond transport, the entire city ecosystem has to be prepared. While Electra claims it has big market share in electric buses in Brazil, they're not the only players in the game. BYD, a well-known personal EV manufacturer, also produces electric buses, and they're now going hard on expansion into Latin America. Meanwhile, Mercedes-Benz is actually doing business with Electra, where they are producing electric bus chassis like these in Brazil for companies like Electra and others. The company says it already has 250 chassis circulating in Sao Paulo.
We believe it's the decade of the bus.
That's Achim Puchert. He's the president at Mercedes-Benz Brazil and the CEO of Mercedes-Benz Latin America.
So we see a stronger need in public transportation, and we expect it also here in Latin America to grow significantly towards 2030. I think in general you have to understand, like with one bus you can capture 50 cars.
While the personal EV market relies heavily on imports, Puchert says increasing domestic production for electric buses will be important.
I think it's a great opportunity, though, that maybe is missed at the moment, because if you have natural resources that allow hydrogen production, or if you have the ingredients for lithium, like for instance Argentina for battery production, obviously that could also stimulate to do it locally. In the end, I believe Brazil or Argentina, they will not win if you import all the components or the vehicles, but you should rather see that you develop the local industry and then utilize the natural resources in the countries.
Just like with personal electric vehicles, increasing domestic solutions is seen as critical for the future production of e-buses. So, are Costa Rica and Brazil in the fast lane when it comes to e-mobility? Government policy in Costa Rica is one contributing factor to an uptake in EV purchasing, while startups like Electroconversiones de Costa Rica hope that they can push a different bracket of car owner to be able to sport green license plates like these. Meanwhile, megacities in Brazil are investing more in electric buses, which capitalize on rich and diverse green energy sources. But even though the speed is picking up, the road is a long one.